When did we, the people, become the problem? I ask this question because it's becoming increasingly clear that the agenda being pushed by those in power is anti-human, anti-people, anti-us. The Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the New World Order, call it what you will, but it all boils down to the same thing. Everything that's wrong in the world, from the climate to the food supply to energy supply, the whole damned lot, everything that's wrong is all our fault, and we are to be made to suffer in order to make it right. And when it's remade, it won't be for us, the many, it will be for the few. If you feel in your gut that something somewhere is badly wrong, then you're not alone. I feel it too, and have done for a long time. It's like the sensation you get when you're in a car and it goes too fast over a humpback bridge, and your insides feel flipped into the air by the momentary weightlessness. The feeling goes away when the car settles onto the road once more. But the problem we have now is that we're being deliberately kept in mid-air by one dreamt-up crisis after another, so that we cannot ever relax. We cannot get back to normal because normal is not allowed. I notice it's all gone quiet on the war in Ukraine and on COVID restrictions. Both are still on the back burner though, ready when World War III and/or lockdown is needed again. For the last few days, it's been climate code red from President Joe Biden. Here it's been all about how summer itself is the enemy, and that's our fault too. We can't be trusted to keep ourselves alive when the sun's out. We used to race to the Med in search of those temperatures so we could boast about them and the tan when we got home. I struggle to make sense of any of it. That war is also being waged on the natural order of things becomes more and more blatant, more and more obvious. Most recently, it's the bid to seize and centralise the ownership of farmland. Computer software salesman Bill Gates is now the largest private owner of farmland in the US, with more than 250,000 acres in 19 states. Bill Gates is not a scientist. Bill Gates is not a physician, nor any kind of virologist or vaccinologist, but has been the single most enthusiastic salesman of so-called vaccines for COVID, vaccines that do not work as advertised and that have killed or damaged people in numbers as yet unknown. He's also not a farmer, and yet he's hoovering up American farmland as hard as he can go. Ask yourself why that might be. Why does a man who is not a farmer, but who would rather we, the troublesome people, eat the synthetic meat and genetically modified food in which he is so enthusiastically invested, taking as much of the farmland as he can for himself? The man who did more than any other single individual to push experimental medical products of untested, unproven safety, products in which he was similarly invested into every human arm on the planet, is every bit as determined to dictate what goes into our mouths as well. Ask yourself why. And just by the by, who put Gates in charge of the world anyway? In the Netherlands, the leftist World Economic Forum flavoured government is seeking to drive farmers off the land they have farmed for generations. This is being done under the pretext of the Green Agenda, Agenda 2030, punishing the farmers for their use of the fertilisers that were foisted upon them by the state and EU-sponsored agriculture industry in the first place. This is a confected crisis, cover for a blatant objective to take land away from private people and place it under the control of the state. The message is clear. The states want us to think farmers have messed up the land, messed up the environment, messed up the world, and so now the land must be taken away from them once and for all. All across Europe now, farmers are rising in opposition to the imposition of EU policies they describe as anti-farming. The scale of the protest is breathtaking, and yet most of the mainstream media pretends it's not even happening. I say this assault on those who have worked the land that should be providing us with our food is nothing less than evil. Collectivisation of farming has been practised before, of course, by communists. It's always by communists. In the Soviet Union, the cruelest of the land grabbing focused on the demonisation of a class of people just a generation or two beyond the misery of serfdom under the Tsars, totalitarians of another sort. A minority of farmers had briefly secured ownership of some land, made enough money to build decent homes for themselves and their families. This was the group the Soviets targeted as the kulaks, a word that means tight-fisted, greedy, mean, so that the mob would turn on them. The kulaks were murdered, the women raped first. Those that survived were driven off their land and herded onto trains bound for exile in Siberia, never to return. With those that knew how actually to farm removed from the farmland, a disaster unfolded. The insanity of collective farming Soviet style caused the Holodomor, a famine that claimed many millions of lives in Ukraine and elsewhere in the Soviet Union. People descended into cannibalism to such an extent that posters had to be put up in the countryside reminding parents it was wrong to eat their children. Anti-human, anti-people, that's the agenda now. The determination to take farmland away from farmers is also anti-nature. It's more of the same anti-human, anti-nature mindset from totalitarians who also do not care about the natural order of things. It should never have been about build back better. What is needed is back to basics, back to nature, back to normal. For thousands of years, our species didn't have any sense of owning the land. Rather, they belonged to it as hunters and gatherers of wild food. 10,000 years ago came farming and farmers, and that sense of ownership made manifest with the building of walls, the raising of tombs that meant the bones of the ancestors remained on the land they had farmed in their time as physical proof of connection to place. There was a profound and meaningful connection to the land and to the soil. Steadily in just the last few centuries, agriculture was industrialised, and in the bid for profit and productivity, farmers were pushed to use products that were poison to the wider environment. Finally, the penny has dropped for those in power. They look on at those who own the land and see another challenge to their outright control, another enemy to be defeated or erased. The farmers who cooperated with systems in order to meet targets and stay afloat are now being made scapegoats for consequences over which they had no control in the first place. Now the land itself is being taken from us, from the people. Farmers are being offered money to leave, sell up, abandon the farms their families have worked since a time out of mind. That land is being bought not by young farmers with a view to continuing ancient traditions, but by corporations and asset management companies that will ensure nothing grows there at all. If they have their way, the little people will be fed from labs with synthetic meats and infinitely processed plant-based abominations that, judging by sales in supermarkets, hardly anyone wants. Frustrated by our human insistence on real foods, real beef, lamb and pork, real vegetables grown in fields, we're to be separated from the soil once and for all. Anti-human, anti-nature, it's all around us. We've been made a wasteful species, encouraged to use once and throw away, turning our backs as millions of tons of good food are bulldozed into landfill. The so-called green agenda is predicated upon the rape of the earth for rare minerals, lithium and cobalt and more, also metals like copper, silver and gold. The extraction of those commodities means wholesale destruction of environments. Before a single turbine is raised or solar panels set in place, the sites are cleared and sterilised of all life. The turbines are held up by massive plugs of concrete. While in action, they kill millions of birds. When they come to the end of their working lives, there's nothing to be done with the colossal blades but to bury them in vast landfill sites. There's plastic everywhere, in the landfills and in the rivers and the sea. During the pandemic, the production of plasticised masks, testing kits, PPE equipment, all plastic, went into overdrive. Where are the activists to complain about the billions of masks and the rest now in the ground and in the oceans, throttling the life out of marine creatures, steadily dissolving into the microplastics that will end up in our bodies as we consume the fish? More and more, we've been separated from the land and from nature. We've been systematically uneducated so that we don't know where food comes from. We do not know how to grow food, how to raise livestock. Connection to the growing and rearing of our food should be intrinsically human. Eating food reared and grown organically, close to our homes, rather than mass-produced on factory farms, shrink-wrapped in plastic and flown for thousands of miles, is the very making of healthy, happy people. This is being taken from us for profit, but more fundamentally because it's part of separating us from the natural world itself. The same elite that has taken almost all the money is now after everything else as well, including the land beneath our feet. All the time, more and more plans are demonstrably and obviously afoot to separate us from what has always mattered, from each other, from our landscapes, and even from the creation of the food we eat and the water we drink. More and more of us are fat, unfit, rattling with pills. Fewer and fewer people are happy. We're in the process of being colonised by corporations and companies. They've come for the land. If we're not careful, we'll be herded onto reservations next. That's not a joke, by the way. I've said it before and I'll keep saying it. It doesn't have to be this way. Look now to the farmers. those that are being bullied off their land and out of existence. There's so much we need to remember and to relearn, and awareness of the land is part of it, in fact, central to it. The relearning should start with the land, with the soil. It should start with teaching a child how to care for a single seedling. We come from the soil, and one way or another, we go back to it in the end. While we're here, we should remember that we own it, that the land is ours by right, and that it is our obligation, our responsibility, our right and privilege to care for it so that it can do what it has always done, which is care for us.